So do I straight get into it with the introductions for the panelists?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to the panel on globalization of English literature, language and linguistics identities. I was most unprepared about the introductions. So I will hand it over to the panelists themselves to introduce themselves, because I think there can be nothing better than they using their own words and their own dictions and pronunciations to introduce yourselves. I know this is very odd, but I think I would prefer it like this so that we can all have the diverse language and pronunciations, etc. So we can probably start with Radhika, then Linda, Ameena, and Akshita.
Oh, it's too early for us to start bragging about ourselves, at least for me, as we writers do. But thank you, Piyusha. I think, first of all, I'd like to start by congratulating Ananke. I was trying to catch up on all the sessions I missed yesterday. I caught Kirti's session, of course, Kirti and Aman's session. I saw Arshia Sattar's session was a fiery session. I love Tanushi's chat. I couldn't finish it, but I think yet again, Sabine, you and your team, you've pulled off a fantastic edition. And I'm going to spend today again trying to catch up on the sessions that I missed earlier today. So I'm so excited to be here because once again, we have a conversation that I think we need to have a lot. As for me, why do I need to have this conversation? I identify currently myself as a writer, a storyteller, particularly because I'm also doing a radio show, and I think I'm trying to engage in a lot of other forms of storytelling, and I'm very interested in it. I have been a learning and development professional for about 13, 14 years. And there's a lot that I do in my life where I draw upon my knowledge of a language that's not mine. And that's not I've always carried it as a badge of honor, that it's a language that I'm very comfortable with. It's definitely works for me in my learning and development career. I was a communication specialist. I'm a TEDx speaker. I'm a writer. So of course, I enjoy all the perks of it. But in 20s and 30s, it was a badge of honor growing up in India, because I think I'm a child of the 80s. So I think for our generation specifically, about 30, 40 years after independence, when India was still finding itself, I think we still are in many ways. But at that stage of our country, I think the biggest enabler our parents could offer us was an English medium education. And they did their best. A lot of parents, a lot of middle-class families could not even afford it, but they did. That's all they offered to us. And that landed us in good stead. I'm using it really well in my life. But what I used to see as just something that I had, or something like a badge of honor, or that distincted me from other people at in my 20s and 30s, is something I've come to look at very differently now in my 40s, especially since I became a parent. And especially since I started moving around a lot out of India specifically, because I think it was quite okay until the 2000s, or maybe earlier than that. But I think somewhere in the last decade, the tide shifted. And now at this point, non-native speakers of English vastly outnumber the native speakers of English. And if I may say so, we also speak it decently well, if not better than native speakers, but it's not my language. So I actually come to the discussion with a lot of confusion and the idea to get a lot of clarity from you ladies, because am I alone in this confounding situation, or does that make you feel the same? Because all of a sudden I feel a sense of otherness from something that I thought is always a part of me. So so that's in short my introduction. A person that uses, not very short though, I agree, but I'm a person who uses the language extensively in her line of work, and still has suddenly started losing the sense of connect with it.
Thanks, Radhika. I believe I'm next. Thanks to the organizers of this, to my fellow panelists. It's such an honor to take part. And Radhika, what you said touches a chord with me, because I'm from New Zealand, right? So technically a native English speaker, but now that I'm studying in the UK, I've been pulled up for certain aspects of the way I write my English, because New Zealand has Pacifica Maori population, so there's that influence. And also I lived in Singapore for 30 years with this English patois with its embedded Chinese grammar. So I've like the placement of the word already. I've been crossed because I put it at the end of the sentence sometimes. It's kind of got an exclamatory role, but the native English speakers in the UK, you know, are pulling me up on it, and so it's causing me to wonder about my own identity, and to realize that there's a really limited way of defining writers. Why must we be defined by national states when more of us are transnational writers? But then, how do you describe us? Is there a role for us, or is it something bigger happening? So I'll just throw those things, and just quickly some background about me. So I'm the author of a memoir, Loss Adjustment, about the death by suicide of my teenage daughter. So that was shortlisted for Singapore Book of the Year at the Publishers Awards there. And it was a bestseller, and we've just sold world Chinese translation rights to it. I'm also the author of a poetry collection, Sign Language for the Death of Reason, and I'm a writer of creative nonfiction and some commentaries. So I'm just really looking forward to what the other panelists have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda and Radhika, and hello, Piyusha and Sabine. And I'm really honored and delighted to be here, especially since, you know, all what's happening at my end of the world. So when Piyusha said to introduce ourselves, I thought, oh, okay, I'll just say my name, I'll just say who I am. But Radhika, you went straight into the meat of it. And so you have put us all in a bit of a spot. So like Linda, I'll just say who I am a little bit. I'm a Sri Lankan writer. I belong to the minority Muslim community in Sri Lanka, and I write only in English, not even primarily. In fact, English is my first language. So Radhika, I identify a lot with what you said about being a colony, and our parents realized the value and importance of English, and they realized it was the world language, and so we were educated in English. The negative thing is I'm not really very good at any other language, not even the vernacular languages in the country, because belonging to this particular minority community, the Muslims, we don't have a language of our own. So depending on area, if you're in the north and the east, you will know Tamil. If you're in the south and the west, you know Sinhalese. And because we were educated in English, we learned Sinhalese as our second language, but I'm not fluent in it. I can't write a novel, or I can't even write a poem in it. For me, that is the benchmark of if you're fluent in a language. I can speak it. I can speak and understand Tamil, but I cannot write Tamil, whereas I can read and write Sinhala. So there's a lot of, Sri Lanka now, 74 years after independence, is like going through a massive discussion on the role of language, on the power of language, and I'll speak more about it when we connect all the dots. I'm basically a trained sociologist, so I started my life in nonfiction. I wrote 2 collections of short stories. I wrote a novel. And then I've just published in 2020 my nonfiction book on historical nonfiction, memoir, travelogue on Ibn Battuta in Sri Lanka. And it won the state-led prize. It's also being translated into Chinese. So I'm delighted about that. And it's translated into Sinhala as well, which I'm even more delighted about, because now a good fair section of my own population will be reading it. Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly jump in and apologize, Akshita. Just really sorry. That was not my purpose at all, Ameena, to put anyone in this spot. I'll just give one disclaimer. I think I read this somewhere or I heard it somewhere, and it's just stuck with me, and I think it's slowly altering me. And that was that when you introduce yourself to a new audience, don't just tell them who you are, tell them why you're there. They don't need to know who you are. They need to know why you're there. So I think probably, but I'm sorry.
So I actually love that Radhika jumped straight into it, because language is part of our identity and why we're all here. I was very struck by the initial invitation that came from Ananke magazine. Thank you so much for having me on board, because the initial invitation was talking about people who write in a language that is not their first language. So the first question, what is a native speaker? And who then has the right to speak a certain language? And when it comes to English, and how they speak it is also a power dynamic. Now, Radhika mentioned, if I've understood correctly, that the English medium education was a badge of honor, but now one is a little uncomfortable about the use and the way one uses English. Linda is talking about being held to standards of localized English in Singapore and also now in New Zealand, where she's writing, because she's writing for audiences across time and space, but also who are very used to certain vocabularies. Ameena talked about having a language of our own. What does that even mean? It means that language is part of our identity. And for many people, that idea of nationalism, of unique identity, is tied into how we express ourselves, perhaps through words or a dance or something else. So me, I was born in India, but I have actually spent most of my life in Singapore. So I'm the product of two post-colonial environments, both of which have the same relationship with English as most of us do here, which is that speaking English, and especially speaking it with a particular accent, grants one power, status, and a certain right, that you speak in a certain way, you're understood in a certain way. And like Linda, who has been my mentor and friend for many years, and in fact, drilled into me the accurate and precise use of the English language for a newspaper where we both work, I learned that there are various kinds of English. Like I could say, hi, how are you? Or I could say, have you eaten yet? Which is the more common greeting in Singapore, which is directly sort of taken from the Chinese. When I say Chinese, I think I mean Mandarin, Hokkien, and a variety of dialects. I've written two novels, and this one is, you probably can't see it, it's called Nimita's Place, and it's about migration and about the partition of the subcontinent into India, Pakistan, Bangladesh in the 1940s, and what migrations that triggered, as well as the politics of migration in the present day, because when a migrant comes into a particular area, they don't speak the language quite the same way as the initial residents. So this book was, it won a prize in Singapore, but it's been incredibly difficult to sell because the Indians find it not Indian enough, too much Singapore in it. And the Singaporeans are like, wait, we don't get it. There's too much Indian in it, too much Indian English. So then I wrote this second book, which is called Beauty Queens of Bishan, and it's about beauty parlors in Singapore. It's very localized, very Singapore flavor, completely in English. But because what I'm using is Singapore English or Singlish, again, difficult to translate outside audiences in Southeast Asia. So here are the questions that I have, which are the questions you have. Who is a native speaker? And why do we even use the word native when this language has become part of us, part of our identity, localized and globalized globally? If we have a right to speak English as native speakers, do we also have the right to be understood? Because what we say in one context may be obscure to someone in another context and carry so much with it. And the third thing is language has so much power at different levels. I've written novels, I've written for a newspaper, I've written for academics, and I've learned that in international politics, language has power. You don't call something a war, even if people are killing each other, because the minute you call it a war, you set a certain chain of events into action. And then the fact that we are talking about so many major issues around the world in a common language, which is English, and yet coming to it from our own different contexts. To me, that is absolutely fascinating. And the power dynamics that we assign to the people speaking the language based on where they come from and our assumptions, that's also really amazing. So I'm here to really listen to you all and learn from you all. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone. I think that was a wonderful sneak peek into how global English truly is and how diverse we all are. And yet, despite that, English is very much considered to be a language of the elite, even though it has a big role to play in how we perceive literature, how we engage in everyday communications, even I think it does have an impact on how language influences perceptions about people. So I want to dive right into it, but because Radhika, Ameena, and Akshita, you all mentioned that you've written stories in English. I want to ask all of you, what is it like writing in the colonizer's language when your writing is essentially subversive, based on lived experiences like oppression, identity, your own everyday experiences. So what is it like to write in a language like that, and yet make sure that your writing, even though it is centered in English, appeals to a wider readership, which by itself may be consuming and speaking language differently? So I think we can start with Akshita this time, Ameena and Radhika. So,
thank you. That's a very thoughtful question, and that's 2 points to it. First, what is it writing in what you call the colonizer's language? And second, when your writing is also, I'll just take the second part. There are actually 3 or 4 things in that, but writing for a wider audience. So first, here's the thing about the colonizer's language. I'm a woman, assigned woman at birth, living in a patriarchy. I'm quite familiar with writing under a power dynamic that is not skewed to my benefit. English was never a colonizer's language to me, you see, because my parents speak 2 completely different regional languages. So the only way we could communicate at home was through English. English is my language, and the little bits and words and phrases that I have from my various experiences are part of it. So writing in English, various kinds of English, is easy for me. Being understood is not easy for me, because obviously I realize that there are specific contexts. And this is the problem, because Marlon James in 2015 won the Man Booker Prize for A Brief History of 7 Killings, which was a history of Jamaica, Jamaican patois, wildly lauded and celebrated. But, you know, there's me with my little Indian English and my Singlish, and I don't think it's going to get as much traction as Marlon James, because there are still gatekeepers who say, oh yes, we have native English, and then we have English as spoken by the natives, which is worthy to be read in a wide audience. And these are the gatekeepers of publishing. And I don't mean gatekeepers in a negative way at all, because, you know, there's a lot going on here, economic dynamics, etc. But the fact of the matter is that how you want the story to get out is limited sometimes by the language you choose, is constrained by the language you choose, and one has to make one's peace with it and then perhaps find alternative methods. That's been my experience. Or just be content with a smaller audience.
Wonderful. Okay. Ameena.
Thank you, Akshita. You always bring such very interesting points and make me think, all of you make me think in different ways. So about the colonizer's language, I like Akshita, think that English is my language. In fact, one of the things I believe that Indian writers and Sri Lankan writers who write in English have done is we have taken ownership of English, the way it is written, the way we speak it, even our pronunciation. It could be with a Sri Lankan accent or an Indian accent, but actually now we've got to the point where beyond caring, we don't care what the white person tells us how it should sound like. We speak like this and we are like, okay, if you don't like it, stuff it. But having said that, the English I speak and the English I write is a bit old-fashioned, because I'm the oldest of all of us here. And so I had a very traditional education. I read traditional books. In fact, it was only in my 20s when I went to study in America that I discovered books written by South Asian writers, South Asian, Arab, Iranian. It was, for me, a mind-boggling experience. And I think for about 7 years, I devoted myself to reading nothing but women of color and writers of color. And that totally changed my perspective. But so when I write, and there's so many things that resonate with me, because as writers writing from the South, it's very difficult to get our work out there. And maybe I should be really grateful to the internet and to selling on the web, because now suddenly you're not, the gatekeeper is not Amazon, the gatekeeper is not Random House in England or you know, Piccadilly in the US. The gatekeeper is now if you really work hard at social media, which I don't, I'm a lazy bloody writer, but you can put your work out there. So the defining feature about me that I'm not sure any of you have experienced is I'm also a publisher. So I run a publishing house. It's based in Sri Lanka, and we try to sell our published works of all our writers abroad. And of course, every single author comes to us. They publish with us because they've tried to publish internationally and they've been refused. And then we publish them, and then we try to sell them like mad. We've got lucky, like out of 100 authors, we have sold the rights to 5 authors. And then those 5 authors are considered the most, out of all the authors we have published, those 5, by virtue of having published by an international publisher, has suddenly become, the most validated, the most authentic. They are the true Sri Lankan writer, which is a bit difficult for the others to deal with. So when I think by now, when we write, we've understood that the way we write Indians, Bangladeshi, Pakistan, I'll talk about South Asia because that is what I'm exposed to most of all. Whenever I visited Singapore, I would always buy Singaporean writers' books because I wanted to know how they wrote. And their world was so similar to our world. So it's like, how when you have English authors writing and someone reads it in America, they think, okay, so this is just across the waters, but it's not that much different from the way we live. That's the way I feel when I read writers of color, even if they're from the Middle East, even if they're from Iran, that I think, yeah, actually we have similar cultures, we have similar values. I can't remember if I actually answered the question, but I'll stop there.
Yes, you did, Ameena, first of all, and you also gave us a lot of things to think about. But I love how you touched upon how self-deprecating we can be with our own language. And just because somebody's published internationally and has been accepted, the other 95 doesn't count. That's a very relevant point. But as for me, why did I pick a colonizer's language to write? I didn't pick this language. The language picked me. I was just born at a certain time in a certain country which says this is how we do things. And I started learning in a language that was not mine. I started thinking in the language that was not mine. Everything that I knew around the world was named in a language that was not mine. That's how my brain registered it. And so when I started churning stories, or when I started doing any of that work, those are the words that came to me. If I look at water, I think water and not pani. That's just how it automatically came to me. And it's not a choice that I made. But yes, because I kept on delving into it, I think at some point I breached the line where I got better at expressing myself in that language. I remember being a very good Hindi writer. I do remember that part of me. I remember being very good at Hindi, and because my grandfather was a Hindi teacher. And I remember being a person that somebody would come to in a class when they would be writing their Hindi assignments and saying, this is a very difficult word. Can you translate that for us? I'm not that person anymore. So this is very circumstantial, and it happened organically, by design or by default. I really don't know, but it's something that I've only consciously come to realize now. And why I say that, I think, is because, like I said, my dissociation with English is very recent. And at this point, as a writer, I do find myself at struggling with this quandary of, do I want to continue writing in a language that's not mine? But then I also want to define, what does mine mean? I'm still thinking about my thoughts about this language in that same very language. So my recent, like I said, the disengagement came from the fact that, for example, when we were moving to Canada, or anybody who moves anywhere, I don't know if that applied to in Linda's case, because she would be considered a native speaker, but after more than 200 years of doing this, we are not native speakers. So I have to give IELTS, and I have to do it reasonably well to immigrate. And my husband got admission in the university. He's studying here in Canada. He got admission on the basis of the fact that he has done over 14 years of education in English. So that was established on his application. But yet he had to give an IELTS. So I was just telling my friend, that's so wonderful that first they came and colonized us, and now they want us to prove that they've colonized us enough by getting a score of 7 on my IELTS. So there was a lot of angst with which I started approaching the subject, that who's drawing these lines. So my disconnect from this language is very recent, while I'm still continuing with this language. So I'm probably a drug user who's just recently realized this is bad for my body. So give me a couple of years to figure out where I land. But in terms of reach, I think the reach also was sort of defined for us, because a lot of people like me and my generation, when they started writing or any form of storytelling that they did, the primary audience that they wanted to reach out to, which in my case would be my family or families like me or people like me, I knew they would be as poor with Hindi as I was. So again, I just wanted to say things which I thought a certain set of people will understand, because this is my tribe, this is the strata that I belong to, economic, intellectual, every bit of the kind of, this is the layer of society that I belong to. And this layer either wants to think in English or already thinks in English, or at least wants to keep on showcasing that they think in it. I haven't looked at a Hindi book in like over a decade. I only started picking them up recently. So I think again, the reach was defined by the circumstances of what I was doing and where it was doing. Does it change the fact, because Piyusha's question was also, how do you connect putting out all these subversive ideas in a language that's not yours? Again, I think the only reason that we are still able to do it, why such phenomenal writing, such phenomenal groundbreaking subversive writing is coming out of this region, is because none of us truly really believe this is not our language. This is what we were speaking when we were born. This is what we've been speaking for the last 40 years of our life. For all practical purposes, it is. So to me, this is only at this point academic deliberation, that this is not mine, but then what is? But then that what itself is, it's not Hindi for me. That's what I have to also understand. It's not that kind of a binary continuum that if it's not this, it'll automatically be this. If you're growing up in India, it's not. You could be a Hindi speaking person living predominantly in the South. So you only speak Tamil, you're as bad with Hindi as anybody else. So there is that. For example, when I've recently started a radio show here, and I do, my opening initially was Hello Kamloops. That's how I planned it. That's the city where I am. But then I also realized that I don't want to just say that in the colonizers' language. I want to say it in the language of this land, which is the language of the Shekropek people, of the indigenous people. So I say White Quieter. It took me a very long time to master that pronunciation. I had to actually go and meet elders in the indigenous tribe and say, can you help me fix this? Because I do want to say it, but I don't want to say it wrong. White Quieter. And now I feel a connect with that language, because the relationship that we have between us, we've never met each other. I've never met many indigenous people before I came here, but now my connect is erasure. They did that to my language, and they're doing that to your language, not on my watch. I'm going to open my show with your language. So, there's a lot that we don't understand, that why is it happening to us, even though we speak English well. And I think there's a lot of, like I said, sense of sudden otherness that I have, which I haven't fully unraveled, and hence I'm still writing in English. It may change in the next few years. Give me a few years. My drug is still wearing off.
Thank you, everyone. And just to answer Ameena's question, all of you are answering the questions wonderfully, giving wonderful insights. I'm going to come back to a few of your points, like in Indian English and Singaporean English. But since we're talking about this, there is obviously the cultural and linguistic influence that comes in from each of our personal backgrounds. I think it started with Shakespeare, with him using Latin words into his writing, so much so that now it's common English usage. The same thing is, I think, slowly happening with writers of other languages too, with words from vernacular languages, global languages being used in English. In fact, Linda, your book, Loss Adjustment, is in English, and it has done so well in Singapore, where the national language is Malay. even in India, there's now a non-official language, which I think is a blend of English and
Oh,
Hindi
I'm so
called
sorry, but I
English.
do need to interrupt as the one Singaporean on the panel that Singapore has 4 official languages. They are
Yeah.
English,
I think
Chinese,
that's
Malay,
right.
and Tamil.
Yes, absolutely.
So please,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, of course. And of course, I'd love to hear whether
Absolutely.
Linda agrees with her being a native speaker of English, because I don't think she got the chance to respond to that.
Oh, well, I really would
Okay.
like to say something. Thank you, Piyusha, in response to what Radhika says. And it just tears me apart because obviously I'm coming from a point of, I'm white, so I've got that embedded white privilege. And although I'm, you know, my ancestors came from England, what, nearly 200 years ago, I'm still, you know, perceived as being English. And yet most of my friends are people of color, and it just breaks my heart because they're mostly much more highly educated than I am, much more articulate in the English language, and also it's not just because they're highly educated. Some people are more working class background, yet because they grew up with English at school, they have just such a depth of knowledge about English literature. And so many of them come to me and say, when I've been in conversation with random white people, they get the comment, oh, you speak English and you speak English so well, you know? And so this conversation has got to be opened up. We've got to, people have got to wise up to the fact that this is a globalized world, that the colonizers did a job all right on the colonized, and now the colonized are writing back. And I draw a lot of inspiration from poet Kaveh Akbar, who pointed out that, you know, language is a weapon. So although I am of the colonizer, I'm taking it upon myself to see if I can use language as a weapon. So loss adjustment was the start of that, because it tried to translate a cultural situation trying to translate a universal situation of grief into cultural aspects, for example, of the Chinese traditions of mourning. So the latest thing I've been doing is this poem. So I have a dear friend in Singapore who's a Filipino domestic servant, and she has had cancer and she wants me to tell her life story. So I wrote it as a poem. So one of the things that gets me about university study is that I've been told that the correct speaking of language is iambic pentameter, you know, so unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress. So I've set about, I want to honor the stress nature of the non-iambic pentameter. So I did this in my poem. So I have my friend Maira speaking, but I've made her words, I give them authority, a device called the caesura in poetry, by using a pause to create its own rhythm, to give it authority. And that rhythm can become a fulcrum. So I use that a lot. And I also used her words, her dialect words from the Philippines. She's from Negros Occidental. And so that poem just got second in the Dyslexia poetry contest in the UK. And I've been able to share the winnings with Maira. So I'm really pleased. The judge was Pascal Petit, but Pascal is of an interesting heritage, Welsh and Indian, I believe. So she saw something in that very difficult poem, because it's not a poem you'd usually have, you know, shortlisted like that. My problem is that it's still written by me, the white person, translating for her, for Maira. And my thing is, if it had been Maira herself with the name on there, would she have got that award? So because I guess there are wider considerations of branding there, you know. So those are my 2 cents worth. And the conversation, the other thing I'd like to add is I've noticed in my new round of university studies, it's that my class is much more diverse, and I've got people of color who are rightly angry who are including their work, their languages in the English poetry. And the only thing is they're still italicizing some of their words and putting footnotes. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, you know, because, you know, when I was growing up and I read a story from America, did the American do any footnotes for me? I was supposed to automatically know what, like with Richard Ford, you know, the countryside he's writing about, I was meant to know all that and what it was supposed to evoke. So now it's the turn of the other writers, capital O, to have their work on the stage. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you. And I'm glad Akshita pointed that out, because I wanted to, there's often this misconception that Hindi is the national language of India. And a lot of people say, you know, why are you speaking in English? Speak in Hindi, because it's the national language. And it is so infuriating to correct them. It's not the national language. We have 26 official languages, but I may be mistaken here. So please, Akshita, correct me again if Malay is not the national language of Singapore, because that's what I found in my...
So yes, there is a misunderstanding here about what a national language means. I believe in India it is a similar case. You've got state languages, regional languages, you've got the language of the state, and you've got English. So in Singapore, it was decided that there would be 4 languages given equal weightage in terms of there would be resources devoted to education in these languages, translations in these languages, national messages would go out in these languages. For example, in COVID, you would have had videos, text messages in English, in Chinese and Mandarin, as well as the dialect Chinese languages, in Malay and Tamil. So if you talk about the percentage of people who speak, I would say English is actually the dominant language here.
Dominant language, yeah.
But
I gathered
being a society, yes. However, you're right in one sense that the national anthem is in Malay. The pledge,
okay,
however, is in English. So, you know,
okay,
there are versions as well. So this is
there
what happens
there
when
is
you
a lot
have
of
a
blending
multicultural
that's
society.
happening. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I also want to understand how does
just
this...
like to add one thing here, Piyu. I think the other thing that we also need to remember here is how we understand national language. And when we say, or predominant language, and when we say the most predominant language is English, a lot of these speakers are bilingual. So they're speaking English as well. And they just, because it just suits the tally, so they just put this person automatically in an English speaking category. So if you just take people who purely converse in English and wouldn't be able to find a glass of water for them in a foreign country without it, that would be a very limited population. So, and that's something that we always forget about English. When we say it's the most spoken language, first of all, it's not. Mandarin is by a wide margin. And we just, English, I think, left that berth for like a while ago. But at the same time, we need to remember that most of these people are at least bilingual, trilingual, or polyglots, I think is the word. But we just always put them in the English column and move on to the next person. That's not right.
And that is such a brilliant point, if I could just jump in very quickly, because if language is identity, then multiple languages is also identity. And if we're talking about a colonizer's language, to people in certain parts of the world, Hindi is a colonizer's language. In other parts of the world, Mandarin is a colonizer's language. Language in itself is a tool. It's how we choose to use it and how we incorporate it. So I have to categorically state, to me, English is not a colonizer's language, because by golly, I've colonized it.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. So I want to understand here, because we're talking about Indian English, Singaporean English, we're also talking about using vernacular words in our own writing. And Linda pointed out very correctly, we shouldn't be italicizing our regional words. How does this influence the usage of the language in the English-speaking regions also? What happens to the strict grammatical rules? What happens to the evolution of language? Ameena, please share with us any publishing decisions that you may have had to take with regards to language. So I think Ameena got disconnected probably. So maybe Radhika or Akshita can share their inputs on how you think English is evolving.
Well, I could. Okay, Radhika, please go ahead. I hope Ameena comes back.
Please, Akshita, you wanted to say something?
No. It was just like I'm sure our audience is aware that Ameena is joining us at a time of incredible crisis, where she's literally, I think she said she was using a friend's bakery because there's a generator to join us because fuel is in short supply and other things. So we're very, very lucky to have her here. That was all.
Absolutely. And I hope she does join back, because this question Piyusha very rightly pointed in her direction. I would like to know how it impacts her publishing decision, because I think when it comes to a writer, at least I like to think so, because it makes things easier in my head, that I still have certain set of creative liberty saying, I'm going to write this a certain way. Do what you want with it. But a publisher has to think of a lot of things. In fact, just the other day, I think there was this huge conversation about genres, a conversation that I hate. And a writer very rightly said what I feel exactly, that what genre I'm writing it is the least of my problems. I'm writing. It's a publisher's problem. I'm so glad she's back. But to answer your question, Piyusha, quickly, I just submitted a story to an international publication for the first time, and I was very interested in that publication. It was their first print anthology. So there was that sense of pride that I have to be a part of it, but also because that project is primarily going to publish immigrant and refugee stories, and they just want to focus on that thing. So and even though I wrote a story, and it's a story that does not walk around eggshells around mental health issues, it doesn't euphemize mental health issues, it doesn't euphemize some things that people would prefer in India to euphemize. It's to mellow down, not euphemize, mellow down, make it palatable. I wanted that story to go out as raw as it was. So even though the honesty of that story was of primary importance to me, even then when I was sending out, I said, I wonder if I should put a glossary underneath and say what this word means and what that word means. And I went over that discussion in my head for a couple of times, and I'm like, heck, they've got Google. If they can't figure this out, they can just Google it, what this means. We do use Google Translate all the time. So I think we are beginning to get that confidence back as writers, that we are going to use the word that works for our story. It takes 10 seconds to Google. And if you can't Google that much, you're not invested in my writing. So I'm not writing for you then. I'm writing for the person I'm invested in. But yes, floor is Ameena's.
I'd just like to say something about that, because Radhika, and that so resonates with me. From my very first book, which I published in 1999, many people, because Sri Lanka was like so West oriented, that the writers, the publisher who published that book came and said, aren't you going to have a glossary? And because I was studying in the United States and I had a bit of that arrogance in a way, I'm like, no. And we didn't have Google at that time. I'm like, no, if they're really I said, I want my reader to be an intelligent reader. That reader is going to get the maybe not the exact meaning, but an understanding of what that word means from context. And even now, glossaries are a huge pet peeve of mine, unless it's a non-fiction, semi-academic book where we need to define certain terms, and yes, I will allow that. I have a very, very good selling book by an author who lives in America. Every month she writes me an appeal. Please, can we put a glossary in the book? Please. And I'm resisting. I'm like, no, your readers are intelligent in whichever part of the world they are. They do know the local word for uncle and mother and, small things like that. It's not going to affect the tone of the book. I'm sorry, I was away for a little bit, so I don't know what you all spoke about, but there were two things that from previous discussions I want to talk about. One is, we are talking about English today because English is the global language. It's where when you travel to far-flung places, except maybe France, you would use English to try to navigate your way through. When I am in France, I speak Sinhala and pretend that I don't know any English, because then they won't throw me out of the cafe. So
That's a great tip. That's a great travel tip.
Yeah. And when I have to now give you another travel tip. When I'm in India, because before COVID, I used to go there at least, every 2 years. If I'm in the north, I will say to them, and we have to go and buy tickets for any, and there's a different fee for the locals, a different fee for foreigners. I say, I'm an Indian. And they say, Indian? And I'm like, yes, I'm a Tamil from Tamil Nadu, and I speak my Tamil. And they don't quite know. And if I'm in the South, I say, you know, I left Tamil Nadu a long time ago, so my Tamil is a little bit rusty, but I'm as Indian as you are. And so managed to work my way and basically lie so that I get the cheaper rate. So when I was doing research on Ibn Battuta's travels, I mean, that man went from one end of the world, from Morocco, all the way to China. He went to like 40 countries. It didn't occur to me what language he used until it came to the chapter on Sri Lanka. And because I was doing the travels, his travels in Sri Lanka. So I had to read that chapter over and over again. And suddenly I realized this man was using Persian, which meant the king of Sri Lanka knew Persian. And then when I went back and read the whole book documenting what are the languages he spoke, I realized Persian in the 14th century was the English of today. So it was the language of trade, it was the language of faith, it was the language of wars. You hired mercenaries, you negotiated prices, all using whatever form or dialect of Persian. And language is a reflection of global politics. And I think Radhika said that Mandarin is the language that is most spoken purely because China has maybe the largest population. But I know in Sri Lanka, there are many Chinese language classes. It could be Mandarin, because we can see the geopolitics of what's happening here in our own country. And we understand that it's not so important to speak English. It's more important to speak Mandarin. Which brings me to my third point, Linda. You spoke about language is a weapon. And I got a shiver when you told me that, because in Sri Lanka, in the universities, the word they use for English is called kaduwa, which is sword, which is the divider, which means the divider between the haves and the have-nots, the divider between the privileged and not. And if you get into Sri Lankan universities and they believe that you know that you're English speaking, you will get hazed and ragged far more and far like quite viciously compared to any others. In fact, that reaction against speaking English has resulted in like many university students who have the facility to learn English for free, being prevented to go for the classes, because the trade union, the university trade union, the student trade unions prevent them from it, saying, don't you dare learn the language of the colonizer. So it's very political.
Could I just clarify one thing about the Mandarin and English speaking? Because I think it was Radhika who also brought up this point earlier that people will be bilingual. So perhaps you mean first language speakers, as in the ones they're most comfortable in, would be Mandarin, because I think there are far more English speakers, and some statistics bear me out there, because right now English is still the global language of commerce, politics, trade. And if it switches to Mandarin, it's such an affront to so many people's identity that we're seeing things breaking out, conflicts all around the world. So
no, you're right. It's actually, like Ameena also said, it's a very geopolitical angle, and hence you will keep on reading that English is stopping even when English is in the top 10%, because most of those articles are written by native speakers of English or originate from countries that are written in English. I think the day our Google turns to Mandarin, you will see a different figure. So that's amazing how everything that is coming to us is being filtered through so many lenses. And by the time we get it, we don't know. But I really want to talk quickly about what Ameena said, because Linda, you're right. Language is a weapon. And there's a different angle to that language being used as a weapon. Something like Ameena said. So my 9-year-old boy, he's been moving around a lot with us last couple of years. He's practically gone to a new school every year. He studied in a school in Malaysia. He studied in a school in Bangladesh. He's studying in a school in Canada. And English is automatically his first language. It just is. I didn't want it to be like that. It's just that he moved around so much. So he speaks a smattering of Mandarin that he picked up in Malaysia. He speaks a little bit of Bangla. He used to speak very well, Bangla very well, but he's lost it. He doesn't speak Hindi much. He understands Hindi perfectly. So in his head, English is his language, and that's true. But he came to Canada, and I think it was the second or third day, and he met another immigrant. I think she was from Middle East, and he was saying something to her, and she said in a tone that really affected him deeply, and he came back pretty shook up home, and she said, how do you speak such good English? And he couldn't understand what does good mean. And that lady still had a bit of a different accent, so he could figure out that she's not a native speaker of English. But he doesn't understand, these are not words he knows, native speaker, non-native speakers. So he understood that maybe she doesn't speak English very well, but why is she questioning me that I can speak very well English? It's like asking me, why do you have two arms? Why do you have two legs? And he came back so shook with it. And then that lady, I have personally noticed, she has been targeting him for the last some time. She's very polite to other kids, but she's very rude to him, because to the Canadian kids who speak English, but she's not polite to my son, an Indian origin kid who speaks good English, because she herself is an immigrant and she doesn't speak it so well. And I was gobsmacked when that happened. I didn't know how to address it. I still don't know. He's going to go back after spring break, and I have to come up with the answer of how does he deal with that woman. But there was a target that was painted on his back because he's an immigrant kid, but he speaks good English by another immigrant. Language is a weapon, you're right, in many ways. Too many edges of a sword.
Yeah, Lena, you want to add to that?
Yes.
So I also want to say that, I'm sorry, Linda, was it Linda who was supposed to speak?
No, I'd rather hear you, Ameena.
So, Radhika, my husband and I speak English. English is the language of our communication. But when we lived in Switzerland, there were so many people who were shocked. They would ask us, and they were from the south. So they were from the Middle East, Egypt. They were from India, and they're like, why aren't you speaking your language? Why are you speaking to each other in English? And like your son, I was shocked because I was like, what language am I to speak? I don't know. My husband speaks 4 languages fluently. I mean, as good as English. He speaks French, he speaks Spanish, he speaks Sinhalese and English fluently. And so my husband said, if I speak to her in the language that is in Sri Lanka, Sinhalese, I will take a whole day to tell her, one sentence, because it would be so difficult for us to be communicating in a language that we didn't feel comfortable communicating with each other, because we had met speaking English, and we it was the most comfortable language for both of us to speak to each other. But if we went to a party, or we went for a meeting, or we went to a cafe, and we wanted to say something about the waiter or the food or about somebody at the next table, we would be speaking Sinhala together. And I started noticing that I speak Sinhala more with my family when I leave my country. So I just thought that was, y'all might find it interesting.
So in that sense, language is also, interestingly, like you said, I think it's a wonderful idea that language is also the boundary that we draw around us, that I will only let you inside this boundary if you know this language. I need to be comfortable enough with you. So that is the scaffolding that we put around us when we go out, so that if I have to say something about the nasty waiter, I can use it. And all this happens subconsciously. We don't plan on it. All this happens subconsciously. I've started working on my Punjabi since I got here, because I have some Punjabi friends, and if I want to say something, it's just that I later realized everybody understands Punjabi in Canada, so it's not helping me. But yeah, you're right, and we do that subconsciously. That's the weirdest part.
Oh, I do it very consciously. My family and I have decided we now need to learn languages beyond the ones we speak, because everybody understands the languages we speak in Singapore. But two things. One is I did go to Baidu and check, and yes, Baidu would have Chinese as the most spoken language. There's like 200,000 users more than English. So it is interesting. The results we get are filtered. You're right there. But I'm really interested in the fact that most of us here have the refuge of a second language. It is a refuge, a second, third, even fourth language, because it allows us to demarcate our identity and also use the lack of dominance as a dominant power move. So, but it's also because language shapes how you think, shapes the ideas you articulate. Sometimes I think it really helps my writing, having access to so many different ideas in imagery, because what's common in Hindi or Japanese is not so common in English. So if I use it in English, people are like, oh, what a solid use of the English language. And I'm like, no, just translate it over here. But they don't need to know that. But Linda, I'm really interested in your point of view over here, because do you have the refuge of that second language? And you are primarily right now, at least, you've always played with language. You know the power of the words and how rhythm, syntax, everything influence it. So do you have the refuge of a second language, and how is your English similar to or different from native English?
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. I've just written a poem about it, a prose poem, that issue of feeling inadequate because I don't have another language. And the University Creative Writing Society is going to publish it. So the poem itself includes Mandarin, Hindi, Malay. The thing is, I don't have an ear for language, so the words I pick up in other languages are mostly to do with food and money. So it's frustrating not being able to confide to someone, to whisper to Akshita at a meeting some remark, but it's not. It's a way of reclaiming your own, an aspect of your identity. I think it's a very useful tool, one I envy. I acquire what words I can to convey some things, but it is frustrating when I go into an area and I know people are talking about me, but I can't tell what they're saying, and I always assume it's derogatory. That's what happens with the other. If you're not dominant, you assume the worst. So that, for example, also you can, with Google and all that, people can speak as asides to each other in their own language, but the person excluded can now quickly, record it or get the translation and know. So increasingly, it's a very complex social situation now, and I noticed that with that quick translation process, the other is appropriating that language. For example, a friend of mine is a young poet from Bengal who is in the States currently, Akash Mitali. He's not published yet, but he's really brilliant. And he's just shared a poem in which he talks about how he did national service in the Singapore, and how the sergeant would address him with the Tamil word, to describe who he was. He's not Tamil, but it was used in a derogatory way. So that language gets taken and reprised, and I think that's happening quite a bit now. The other thing that interests me, and feel free if you just want to continue this discussion, is I'm interested. So what about if you don't write in anglicized language, anglicizing your tongue? Say, for example, I've got a fellow student who writes in Sanskrit and uses that in her poetry, and that's not so easy to translate. So do you have any solutions for that? Thanks.
Is that to Akshita or Lina, just to clarify?
Oh, anyone can clarify. Thanks.
So your question is, Linda, what happens if you write in a language which is very, which is understood by a very small population? What happens? I think we lose a lot of great ideas and thought that way. We've always lost some great ideas and thought. And there I just look at somebody like Ameena and I just look at the heavens and say, can you send more of those kind of people to us? Because she says, no, I'm going to write it and I'm going to publish it in the language. So we need more publishers like that. And I think the more people like Ameena stands up, and I'm surprised she said herself that the book is doing great, but the writer is insisting on a glossary and she's putting a foot down. I think with that, the tide is going to change. But I heard something very interesting in another WLF discussion yesterday. I think it was Arshia Sattar who said that. I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name, Arshia Sattar. And she said, reception is also censorship. And it just hit me like, oh my God, yes, it is, which is why we are writing in the language that we think we want to reach out to most of the people. So I think for the next couple of generations, when reach is our biggest point, because we just want to get our word out and we still don't have that sense of confidence in our language, whether it be Sanskrit or Bangla or Tamil, I think we probably will put reach before everything else, because subconsciously our idea is that we don't want what we are saying getting censored because of receiving poor reception. And she was saying it in an entirely different context. She was saying the biggest censorship that women face is reception. Just don't read them. They write something mind-blowing, don't read them. To what we did to Taslima. So, so it was said in a different context, but I was like, does that subconsciously affect us? Am I trying to say something in a language to make sure that it reaches maximum people? So I think as indigenous speakers as speakers of different kind of languages, in a couple of decades, hopefully we will get that confidence back in our own languages. We've just started taking that territory back. I think in a couple of decades, we should have that confidence that a person would say, my message gets diluted the moment it's translated. It stays in Sanskrit. You don't understand it, go Google it up. Because Google will also pick up those skills. But I am very worried of how Google would again straitjacket it like Grammarly does. So it's going to be an interesting space to watch, because Grammarly is, oh God, it is so uncreative. It pisses me off. So Google could choose to go that way, that, yeah, high five girl, because so Google and how other companies, I'm sorry, I'm very technologically unsound, so I don't know, I'm only saying Google, but how other companies see the space and how they either try to tight water compartmentalize it and the languages will lose their nuances, or do they want to explore that space? Should be an interesting space to watch.
This is exactly the point that I would like to make, that when we talk about reach, we are speaking the language of economics, exploitation, getting a message across to a lot of people. Now, wouldn't you rather know that the words you spoke or wrote have reached one person, transformed them, become part of them? But that is not something that is rewarded economically. Ameena knows this firsthand because she's a publisher. But in all of human history, that's the only thing that's changed the world, that for a few handful of people to totally take in a message. The other thing is language. We are talking about English. I work with people, children, young adults, who don't have language or language skills for various reasons. That doesn't mean they can't communicate. It just means that we are moving into a certain mode of communication that is optimal. And it's also tied into these ideas of economics, exploitation, that when we talk about sending books to many, we do not think about the few who would really benefit from the deep insight. We're always looking for fast and wide. We're not looking for deep and narrow internally. And is that really the way we want to move forward? How then can we move forward, get the stories out in the languages that are our own, that will become our own, without having to rely on the politics and economics of publishing? And also, this comes back to my question right at the start. If we have the right to speak, do we also have the right to be understood? It is that gap that I think needs addressing, the right to be understood in the English that we speak in our contexts.
Do we have time for me to just say a sentence or two relating to this? So, Radhika and Akshita, the population that reads Sinhala in terms of worldwide population is really very small. But the Sinhala writing and publishing is so vibrant in this country. It really, when I attend the International Book Fair every year, I'm like delighted to meet the poets, the writers, the publishers, and they actually are writing, they are the authentic writers who are writing truly for their readership, which is big by Sri Lankan standards, but not big by worldwide standards. And I think of India and the so many languages that India has, and I know that there are publishers for all the languages, and they're all producing works constantly through the year for that readership. So I just wanted to note that maybe because we write in English, we think in English, we speak it, that we know what is happening internationally as well. But there are all these small languages that are as vibrant and producing great work that happens in English as well.
That's true.
That's a wonderful discussion. And it also makes me wonder about, because we've been talking about all the different Englishes, there are two different versions of English that are widely accepted, American English and British English. And I really hope Indian English, Singaporean English, Chinese English, all of that becomes so normal that it's just part of everybody's identities and not just these people from these particular regions. And it also makes me wonder, what impact does it have on individual identities like indigenous identities or the diversity that makes all of us individually unique? Can we actually have multiple Englishes that exist parallelly? Or is it still a sense of exotification that widens the gap between different regions and cultures? But I think somebody is going to probably murder me from across the scene if I, from the screen, if I continue this discussion right now. Absolutely not forgetting New Zealand English. So I think we'll have to have another panel discussion just on this, and we'll have to request Sabin to do that. But thank you all for joining in, especially Ameena, because I know you're facing challenges because of the collision there. So thank you so much. And for Sabin for putting this together, and to each of you speakers for having such wonderful discussions and insights. I didn't have to do anything. I just sat there and listened and learned.
Thank you very much, Piyusha, and everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine, for
Lovely
organizing
meeting you,
it.
Nanda, Akshita, and Ameena, and thank you for joining us, Ameena. It wouldn't have been easy, as we can imagine.
Yeah.
And you can imagine I'm surrounded by cake boxes and all the elements of a bakery. And my friend said, please don't turn the other way, because then they will know that you're in a bakery.
Why? Tell her.
Yes, please turn the other way.
No, but I'm in the stock room, so it's actually not that.
But that's the best part, because it's the stock room.
Have our cake and eat
It was missing, nobody would know.
Yeah, but there are bags of sugar, flour, all these things. Yeah, I won't starve.
I love being in a
I thought you were thinking of
I
the
love
Bible.
the smell, the aroma. So yeah, you're in a good place.
I am. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. It was lovely
Thank
meeting
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.